Number 6, a persevering life. A persevering life. What I mean by this is the ability to keep on keeping on in spite of difficulties. To keep on keeping on in spite of difficulties. There are disappointments, there are obstacles in leadership, but the spiritual leader will endure. Again, the Apostle Paul models this so well. He had a hard life. I mean, you read his epistles and you kind of pick up just how hard his life was. Paul did not have an easy life as a leader. He was opposed, he was rejected, people threw rocks at him and tried to kill him, he was shipwrecked, he was beaten, he was imprisoned. And yet he looked back on his life and he said, therefore, since through God's mercy we have this ministry, we do not lose heart. You know, he had that view of the future that kept him going, that he was persevering. There's a book that's been long forgotten. A.T. Robertson wrote a book called The Glory of the Ministry, in which he said, the ground of Paul's cheer is not in the marks of appreciation which he received from men. It springs from the fresh gaze into the face of Jesus. Look at Jesus and you will go on with your task. And so we ask ourselves the questions, how dependent am I on the praise of other people in order to keep going on or to keep on keeping on? And this is a real practical question. You know, I've faced difficulties and discouragements, and so have you. And occasionally, if I have to counsel someone who's discouraged, and I say, well, why are you discouraged? Often what I hear is something like, well, I'm not appreciated. I'm just not appreciated. You know, I've given so much time, and no one ever thanks me. I've given so much of my life to this ministry, and no one ever appreciates me. I might as well just quit. I might as well just quit. I'm just not appreciated. You know, if we're leaning on appreciation from other people to keep on going, we're not going to keep on going. Because you know what? Not everybody is thoughtful enough to give us the pat on the back. Not everyone is sensitive enough or humble enough or loving enough to write that note saying, thank you so much. If we're going to persevere, especially through difficult times, our eyes have got to be on the Savior's face. And I think Dr. Robertson was right. We have to have a fresh gaze on the face of our Savior, saying, I'll keep moving forward. I'll keep moving forward. I'm looking at the face of my Savior, and He's smiling. I know this is what He wants me to do. I'll keep on moving forward. And not just, well, come on, where are the notes of appreciation? Where's the pats on the back? I'm not getting any appreciation around here. I quit. You know, if we're going to persevere, it has got to be with our eyes firmly fixed on the Savior. This is one of my favorite passages in the whole Bible, Hebrews chapter 12. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. Let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of God. Consider him, think about him, who endured such opposition from sinful men, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. And if you picture the Christian life as a trek, as a journey, and you say, what's going to keep me from giving up? What's going to keep me from veering off to the left or the right, or just plain old sitting down in the middle of the road? Well, the author of Hebrews says, fix your eyes on Jesus. Consider him. He had a hard life, but he persevered, and he accomplished his mission of dying for sheep. He accomplished his mission. Now you fix your eyes on him, and you keep moving forward. Perseverance requires that the leaders keep his eyes on that one and that day. Your eyes on that one, Jesus Christ, and on that day, the day of judgment. I mean, it's so obvious. A.T. Robertson said most of the minister's rewards lie in the future. You can't get discouraged. You can't give up if you don't see a lot of reward here and now. Because now hasn't been the time of reckoning and reward. This is not in your syllabus, but I remember reading a story, and I don't remember the details, but supposedly a true story of some missionaries. I think they'd worked on the continent of Africa, and they'd been gone for years and years, and they came back to New York City on a ship. And as they came back on a ship, Teddy Roosevelt was coming back from an African safari on the same ship. And so here's this unknown missionary couple returning to America on a ship, and a fellow passenger is none other than Teddy Roosevelt. And as the ship came into the dock in New York City, the people on the docks are going wild. They're going wild because of Teddy Roosevelt. There are people waving flags and cheering and throwing confetti, and Teddy Roosevelt gets off with his entourage, and everyone's so excited. Teddy Roosevelt. Missionary couples watching all this from the railing of the boat. And finally, after the presidential entourage is off and the big wigs are all off, they finally get their bags and they head down the gangplank, and no one's cheering. And one of them, I'll say it was the husband, who was kind of discouraged and said, Teddy Roosevelt got all kind of accolades coming. No one's here to cheer us on. And his wife said, but we're not home yet. We're not home yet. You see, we have to remember that. Of course, we all appreciate being respected or appreciated, but we can't depend on that. We can't live for that now, because our reward primarily lies in the future. Oh, there are some rewards now, those words of appreciation, but most of our rewards as leaders lie in the future, whenever we face Him, whenever we're home. And so, with that in mind, we patiently persevere. We continue to move forward knowing we're not home yet. Another characteristic, a life of love and compassion. A life of love and compassion. Doing what's best for someone else, no matter what the cost. Paul told Timothy in his last letter, for God did not give us a spirit of timidity, but of love. This is not a trick question. What comes between 1 Corinthians 12 and 1 Corinthians 14? 1 Corinthians 13. I know we have some mathematic people here. Yes. 1 Corinthians 13 comes between 1 Corinthians 12 and 1 Corinthians 14. And you say, well, what's your point? 1 Corinthians 12 is about what? Spiritual giftedness. 1 Corinthians 14 is about what? Spiritual giftedness. 1 Corinthians 13 is about what? It's about love. And if you think of that sandwich that Paul makes, here's giftedness, and in between is love. Why does he do that? He says, now I will show you a more excellent way, the way of love. And the Apostle Paul's making a point to the Corinthian believers that love is the excellent way. Gifts, even if you are very gifted, even if you have great competency in leadership, and yet you do not have that character trait of love, Paul says about himself, he said, if I would be that way, I would just be a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. I'd just be making noise. You have to love people. Is your life, is your character marked by a sacrificial willingness to lay down your life for others? A life of love and compassion. An eighth character trait in the life of a leader is a life of tenderness and sensitivity. Now, does that go with your idea of leadership? Being tender, being sensitive? I'm afraid that we live in a culture where being aggressive and dominant is often seen as leadership, but that's very unbiblical. A biblical leader is one who is marked by tenderness and sensitivity, feeling what others feel. I read through this passage a number of times before it dawned on me what Paul is saying. In 2 Timothy 1:4, in his prologue to his last letter, Paul said, recalling not my tears. Paul didn't say recalling my tears. He said recalling your tears. I long to see you that I may be filled with joy. Now let me point something out here. We have a tendency to remember our own tears, right? We have a tendency to remember that. We go through a really difficult time and we don't forget that. You think, yeah, back in 93, remember that? I was going through a really rough time. I remember really well. I remember nights just crying and crying. And someone else says, but do you remember when I cried? Do you remember me crying? You were crying? I mean, I was talking to someone the other day and we were kind of teasing about it. I said, the difference between your problems and mine, yours are merely yours and mine are mine. And we tend to be that way. We're very aware. We remember so much our own struggles. We remember our own tears. And we tend to be rather oblivious at the hurts in other people's lives. But a godly leader is sensitive to other people. A godly leader is very tender and sensitive to what other people are going through. Paul said, I recall your tears. Paul noticed when Timothy cried. He noticed when Timothy cried. He says, I remember that, Timothy. The Apostle Paul wept over his friends in Ephesus, the Ephesian leaders. He told them in his last address to them, he said, "Remember that for 3 years I never stopped warning each of you day and night with tears." He was tender-hearted toward them. Jesus reminded his followers that the Pharisees were not godly leaders. He said they tie up heavy loads and put them on men's shoulders, but they're not even willing to lift a finger to move them. You make life hard for other people, and you do nothing to help them live life. But Jesus is saying, be the kind of leader that I am. Be tender. Be compassionate toward other people. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Mourn with those who mourn. And so I ask this question, are you and I, are we in tune with the feelings of the people we're leading? Are we in tune with them? Do we notice the needs in other people?